Okay, let's begin with a prayer in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Lord our God, you have given us responsibility and knowledge over your act of creation. And we ask that you also give us the grace to be good stewards of this creation, to revel in its beauty and wonder, and care for it and not abuse it. This we ask through Christ our Lord. The whole ecological crisis is looming and all that. I'm not going to give or offer much advice as to policy prescriptions and how we're going to deal with this or fail to deal with it. I think it's, for most of it, it's overwhelming for most of us. We're not in positions of power to have really any kind of say about this. Also, I'm getting increasingly pessimistic about the future in this regard. But anyway, as Carmelites, we have a role to play as spiritual witnesses in the midst of this. And I remember a gentleman who gave a talk at a conference I attended. His son had just been killed in Iraq. And he wasn't really there to talk about that. It just, that was the surrounding context, because he had it had been arranged with him to talk at this conference before his son was killed. And then his son was killed. And so he had a kind of, there was a little bit of a gloom hanging over him. You know, he saw the Iraq War as, what should I say, not a just war. And so it had taken his son from him. And so I remember he said at one point in time, speaking from the heart, this was really heartfelt, that our responsibility as Carmelites and as contemplatives is to stand witness, not necessarily to do anything about it, because we don't have that power, but like Jesus on the cross, to stand witness to the power of God in the midst of a world that seems to be collapsing, or where evil seems to have the upper hand, etc. I mean, you can imagine, Jesus at that moment of utter powerlessness, yet he had the power of his convictions and of his freedom to live and to give witness to the kingdom of God in that extreme moment, with, nothing to gain for it, but everything to give for it. I always thought his gesture at the Last Supper, I do this for you, in the gift of bread and wine, this is for you. It's very powerful. And of course, that's where our Eucharist comes from. Anyway, what I'm going to talk about is Laudate Si, these remarks, and Carmel. These remarks I gave at a 2015 conference, symposium that I attended and spoke at. And so it's about in the immediate aftermath of the publication of Laudate Si. So a lot of talk going around. So I just thought I would take the document and try and apply it to Carmel, bring in some Carmelite perspective on it. And I was going to, for this talk here, I was going to tweak it and rewrite it and everything. But then I read through it and I said, no, it's pretty good as it is. So I wanted to mess, if it's not broke, don't fix it, as they say. So the name of this is Witnessing to an Integral Ecology in Carmel. So the idea of giving witness. And the term integral ecology is a very important term that the Pope Francis used in Laudate Si. And I'll speak about that more, but a very important term. And a very inclusive term, having to do with attitudes of mind and heart, lifestyle, but that's why, you know, the notion of it something integral. You know, it's a way of being in an environment. Ecology has to do with how life interacts within an environment. And so we are in an environment and we react integrally rather than just crazily. That we try and get to a point where our being in this environment has a certain integral power to it. And of course, that's our mission from God and through the grace of God. And so my concern ultimately is, how does the life of prayer and contemplation help with being in this environment in a integral, I'm struggling with words, but you understand what I'm saying. And it's kind of like, in the background is a question I've always asked is, we're called to be contemplatives. And we need to talk in a lot of Carmelites about what is contemplation and how we dispose ourselves to the contemplative experience of God in prayer. But of course, the conviction of Carmel is that experience, the contemplative experience of God in prayer, is transformative. It changes us as persons. So another question that you really can't separate two, but the other question is, how are we becoming contemplative persons, and what does it mean to be a contemplative person? And Pope Francis, in many ways, raises that question within this context of an ecology. How do we relate to all that is bigger than ourselves? You know, a cat, for example, is designed and develops as a certain capacity to relate to its environment, and therefore to stay alive and have this living relationship to a living environment. And human beings, extremely more complex than a cat. I mean, I love cats, but you know, human beings are very complex creatures and have so many aspects of our being: social, communal, family, intelligence, or the whole intellectual tradition that we're part of, the languages that we use, etc. It's just very complex. And so how do we understand this in an integral way? And then, of course, with the larger concern of how do we relate to our environment, to the planet that God has given us. How do we cherish it? How do we care for it? And contemplatively speaking, a very important word in this regard is beauty. How do we experience the beauty of creation? It's, I think, probably something that most people have experienced, the beauty of creation, often in a very strong, immediate way, a powerful experience. Those who are living in a spiritual life, deliberately living in a spiritual life, have a way, knock that over, have a way of integrating that into their spirituality and their relationship with God. And so, you know, one experience I had is walking at Mary Lake, our monastery in Little Rock, and this surrounded by a pine forest. And I was walking along the trail and I looked at a pine tree there, and there was this absolutely gorgeous pine cone. I don't know if you've ever thought of pine cones as beautiful, but they are. They're extremely so to me. And it's there, and I just looked at it and was just wowed by the beauty of this thing. But I didn't start worshiping pine trees. You know. I had a spirituality to integrate that into, and so this became a moment of an encounter with God through the beauty of creation. So this is, all these ideas are in the background here. So let me start, though, in a personal way. I hope I don't rouse anyone up with this. If you do, if I do, I'm sorry. This opening, but this will tell you my experience in my life to some of these issues of ecology, environmental care, and things like that, and why I'm a little pessimistic about this.
Two connections that I'm making are like the transcendentals, you know, like beauty. I forgot the other two, but you know how they talk about that oneness is one, beauty, and then there's a third, depending on who, I forget what the third one is. Good, I think it is. And then there's other idea of pantheism versus pantheism. And I think the difference between pantheism versus pantheism, that little syllable makes a difference. So for the Christian Orthodox, pantheism is the way to contextualize when we talk about how nature can really speak and see the spark of God in it.
Yeah, it's like, you know, saying God is in creation but not of creation. Like the same way Christians are in the world but not of the world. Yeah, that which is hard to grasp, but it makes sense, I think, to us when we hear that. But if you know, just to describe that, and it would take a lot of words. But it's a truth of our Christian life. Okay, anyway. If I were to refer to the Malaise speech, most of you would probably know what I'm talking about, either right away or after a little jog of the memory. I'm referring, of course, to the televised speech that then President Jimmy Carter gave in the summer of 1979. A speech in which he never actually used the word malaise, but the speech got branded with that word, perhaps as a way of suggesting a certain un-American quality to it. And then the country's ruling economic and political interests, with the willing participation of the news media, moved in and began to disparage, dismiss, and even belittle what President Carter was asking us as a nation to consider acting on in concert. In my view, the rejection of Carter's message was kind of the beginning of the end for me. I was really depressed how our country responded to what he was saying. The failure to take it seriously. And I almost basically copped out at that point. I was gloomy. I was a young man at the time, in my mid-20s, and was rather moved by the speech, as I saw it, finally a political leader, indeed the highest, most important political leader in our land, the president, was inviting us to grow up as a nation by accepting some limitations on our lifestyles and some realism in our expectations. I mean, that's one of the definition of the difference between being a child and being an adult. That you realize limitations that you have. You can't have everything. Other people deserve things. You don't take it from them, etc. And you're realistic about, you try and be realistic about who you are and your place in the world. You know, and your mistakes, to capacity to admit error and mistakes, and to amend your life, etc. So, you know, I think my perception is that our country has been adolescent for 200 years. We're stuck in adolescence or even earlier in childhood, and we can't grow up. And Carter was calling us to make sacrifices, to change our lifestyles, all with regard to energy and our energy consumption. I mean, energy is just how we use the environment for personal ends or something. You know, we extract things from the environment so I can do this drive to the airport and back, or whatever. And it's necessary and important. Food, you know, food consumption, this kind of use, the acquiring energy in this regard. And we've been pretty adolescent about it, and I felt, okay, finally, he's asking us to face this and make sacrifices, make changes in our life, you know, and it was just made fun of. So I was quite depressed after that. Anyway, the way we are living and consuming now, in other words, our status quo as a society, the way we do things, because all of us want to be able to face the ecological crisis without changing anything. You know, as long as it doesn't affect me and I can do what I want. But I mean, that's a childish approach. You know, we have to face as a society that we're destroying, you know, the basis on which we live. You know, we have to clean the house. I mean, we live in a house and we're used to just dropping trash on the floor. We need to clean the house. And stop dropping the trash on the floor. But we can't do it. Anyway, as long as it doesn't affect me, I'm happy about it. You know, this is kind of attitudes. The way we are living and consuming now, in other words, our status quo as a society can't go on forever. We need to live more reasonably, more maturely, and with greater respect for our world. We need to live more, in a word, sustainably. That is, with an eye to others and to our collective future as a nation. But as I said, and as you too no doubt remember, maybe this didn't affect you as much as it affected me. The president's invitation was thoroughly rejected. In fact, in less than a year and a half, we would elect Ronald Reagan, an out-and-out instrument for the present power arrangements in our society, and a spokesman for a kind of unbridled, you can have it all, it's morning in America attitude. It's depressing for me. Of course, it was all phony as can be. What we got was a mix of worshipful militarism, excessive financialization of the economy, and the enactment of supposed trickle-down tax policies that started us on the road to where we are now, to where our nation's wealth and trickle up, not down, into the hands of the few of the 1%. I mean, I just read recently that Elon Musk possesses more wealth than the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area. I mean, that's incredible. Of course, the 80s were also a time when white privilege, white resentment, and supposed white victimhood sought to reassert itself following the changes towards greater equality won during the 60s and 70s. I think this is, part of ecology too. If we can be sensitive to others who are different than ourselves and who are not placed in positions of power and privilege, then that goes a long way to training us to be sensitive to the whole of creation. The same can be said for gender relations. It was a time when many sought to reassert male privilege and its supposed victimhood at the hands of evil feminists and liberals. I mean, the propaganda stuff is overwhelming. Any white man in this country feels he's discriminated against or something is absurd to the extreme. But the propaganda is there to teach him this. American people are hugely propagandized, in my view. Thus, when I say it was the beginning of the end for me, I mean that this refusal to attend seriously to what President Carter was saying, to refuse to change and grow up as a nation, and most importantly, to refuse to step outside that bubble of deep denial and blindness that so infects our national spirit. I mean, when you travel the world, go to the other countries, you realize how encased in bubbles Americans are. They have no clue. Maybe I'm taking longer with this than I intended, and I need to go on. It was 10:31. So I'm going to skip over this. See, I'm editing it as I go along. Okay, to give a simple example of our inability as a nation to step away from the imperialism and triumphalism that lies at the core of our national psyche, let me cite a few words from Laudate Si. Pope Francis is quoting his predecessor, Pope Benedict, from that Pope's encyclical letter, Caritas in Veritate, a wonderful document, if you ever get a chance to read it, or if perhaps you've read it. Caritas, love in truth. Excellent. It's kind of Pope Benedict's take on our contribution to the evolving Catholic social teaching, Catholic sense of the whole of which we are a part, etc. Now this is from Pope Francis Laudate Si, but he's quoting Pope Benedict. To manage the global economy, to revive economies hit by the crisis, that is specifically the recession in 2007, 2008. To revive economies hit by the crisis, to avoid any deterioration of the present crisis and the great imbalances that would result, to bring about integral and timely disarmament, food security and peace. So see some of the goals that he's enunciating from a global perspective. It's food security for people. People, the vast majority of people of this world live in food insecurity. They're not sure where their food is going to come from. I mean, they might have a meal today, but wow, what about tomorrow? And to respond to that, and of course, the constant strife that's in our world. I mean, most recently, of course, the situation in Ukraine. That inspired me, the response of our country to that atrocity in Ukraine. That inspired me. You see, I'm doing my part too. Oh God. Yeah. But I mean, you know, of course, I've watched the news and pray for the Ukrainian people, for the Russian people too. They're a wonderful country. They've had artistically, literary, musically, incredible gifts to the world, but they can't get their government right. You know, they've always had, I don't know, this sort of love for totalitarianism or something. I don't know. Who am I to say? But I certainly pray for the Russian people too. And then, you know, also another thing that we need, you know, a global economy to avoid this deterioration of the present crisis, the great imbalances that we have, to guarantee the protection of the environment and to regulate migration. For all this, there is urgent need of a true world political authority. I mean, this is Pope Benedict calling for a world political authority so that we can have a coordinated response to these things. Protection of the environment, regulate migration, that's going to increase if, you know, once the West, California turns into a desert, where are the Californians going to go? You know? There's already a fair amount of migration. The Syrian war was caused by the desert, destroying our, you know, droughts and stuff, cause crop shortages and things like that. That's the source, the ultimate source of the Syrian war. So it's already going on. Anyway, you listen to a passage like that, quoted by Pope Francis, written by Pope Benedict. Now, can you imagine how such a passage would be received and reviewed in our country? You know, people shouting from TV and radio about this Antichrist who wants to set up a new world order. What sort of experts would be brought in to comment how it fatally mixes politics and religion, or fails to give due place to American exceptionalism, or would lead inevitably to socialism, that great enemy of the American way. And that's how much we are really open to receive any things like this. We're not even capable of dialogue about it. You know, these buzzwords are immediately thrown up to stop dialogue. Anyway, let's plow ahead. That's a grim note to start with, all this. I mean, this is the background that I approach these things with, and why I'm somewhat pessimistic, and the frustration I feel, etc. I guess, though, that I am pretty grim about my country's ability to respond meaningfully and maturely to our present crises. But let me switch gears and move to something more hopeful and pleasant, something more inspiring. Given that setting, what can we as contemplatives do? And now, of course, I focus on my country because this is my country, and the country that influences me, etc., and all that kind of thing. and but you know, it's worldwide in scope, of course. I would like to take as a starting point for my reflections these words from Laudate Si. When the desire to create and contemplate beauty manages to overcome reductionism through a kind of salvation which occurs in beauty and in those who behold it. That's not a complete sentence, but it's a wonderful phrase. Now the reductionism part, of course, he's already, you know, he's been explaining that. I mean, that's kind of, in my view, to the one of the diseases of the modern world, that we tend to, rather than seeing things as a whole, which is messy and hard to grasp, we try and reduce things to little conceptual packets or whatever. It's part of the scientific worldview. I don't blame science and scientists. I'd rather live in a world where we have air conditioning. So really technology is what matters. Science, I don't know. But science is necessary to technology, blah, blah, blah. But the notion that science is the only way to truth, scientism, is one of the big sins of the modern world, and it leads to this kind of reductionism. You know, like, I remember I was reading a book called "This Is Your Brain on Music," exciting title like that. So it was about how your brain experiences music. But the fundamental mistake is your brain doesn't experience music. I experience music. Now, I couldn't do it without a brain, but it's like saying my stomach is hungry. No, I'm hungry. And because, you know, my stomach has something to do with it, but my stomach is not hungry. This kind of reductionism to, you know, particular objects in isolation, and what's missing, of course, is subjectivity too. Anyway, but that's all that kind of thing is what the Pope's trying to get out. I know it's not a whole sentences or a complete thought, but that makes it all the more evocative. Ideologically, so much of what ails us, as I see it, involves some sort of reductionism. I'm repeating myself. I think that's also the approach taken by Pope Francis, for that's the approach overcoming reductionism necessary to cultivate any growth of the human spirit. I mean, that's, yeah, I think the Pope's probably saying that we, in order to live a spiritual life and cultivate the growth of the human spirit. I mean, I used to teach spirituality down in Notre Dame Seminary in New Orleans. And of course, the students, seminarians would always ask, you know, well, of course they would ask, what is spirituality? What is, but no, even more than that, what is the spirit? And they had a kind of, again, sort of a dualism of matter and spirit. And you got to the spirit by getting rid of the matter, you know? And I was trying to explain to him and to explain to them, and with some success, for some of them, others know that my vision of the spirit, and I think it's pretty close to Catholicism, you can correct me, is that the spirit is our capacity to transcend the moment, the self. You know, like John of the Cross speaks of these spiritual faculties. You know, we have sensory faculties, eyeballs, whatever, but spiritual faculties that we have, and there are three of them. the will, the intellect, and the memory. And the will is a capacity to transcend myself through love of others. The intellect is my capacity to transcend the present moment by thinking about, what's not maybe present, etc. And the memory is a little harder to grasp. What John of the Cross means by it, though, is our capacity to understand events happening in the context of time, with a past and a present and a future to it. So humans don't live lives, they live a lifetime, because they live in a relation to the past from where we're coming, but also a relation to the future. And so this capacity to transcend is how I think of spirit, and I would try and inculcate them or whatever, and it was difficult. The crises we are facing today certainly entail a crisis of the human spirit. Indeed, faced with the ecological crisis of our time, our hope lies, first of all, before we get to the matter of implementing policies, in calling forth the capacity of the human spirit, empowered by the Holy Spirit, to overcome reductionistic attitudes and worldviews of any kind, grounded as they mostly are in fear, insecurity, possessiveness, selfishness, and instead to inch towards ever greater transcendence, grounded in an experience of ecstasy, that is, of standing outside ourselves and being spiritually present to the other. I don't think of, when I talk about ecstasy literally means being drawn out of yourself. And I don't, think of, I go into the state and my eyelids are flapping or whatever. No, I mean, an experience of ecstasy would be sitting at the dinner table or the kitchen table with a close friend and having a heart-to-heart talk because she has just lost her husband, and you're trying to share her grief, and to be caught in that moment and listen to her, not thinking of, well, what can I do to solve this, or what can I do in this situation? Is, just really be present to her. That's an experience of ecstasy. Or listening to music and being so caught up, aware of time passing. I had an experience like that not too long ago with Debussy's piano preludes. I put them on. The second set, he has 2 sets. The second one, put them on. It was like, listen, just completely engaged. Listen to this incredible, very creative music. I mean, God, the guy had creativity was out of this world. And just, time passes. You're not even, you're just engaged in it. So, I mean, this, the ecstasy to the capacity to stand outside ourselves and be spiritually present to the other. And so, all the aspects of the human spirit that are wounded, that are stunted, the fear. I mean, Jesus constantly says, do not be afraid. It's all, the angels all throughout the scripture. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Fear causes us to, sort of come back and circle the wagons in ourselves. Insecurity is kind of, similar. Possessiveness, the want to need to have, and to control I guess it's more the control aspect. Selfishness, of course. And so all these things are kind of expressions of the human spirit, but stunted, wounded, as opposed to capable of really transcending and entering into an ecstatic relationship with the other. We must, if our individual and collective spirit is to grow, seek to find ourselves through some sort of going out to the margins and horizons of the individual isolated self. An experience that is cleansing, healing, salvific, revelatory, transformative, holy. There's a set of words for you. In a word, we are to become contemplatives, both in the intimacy of prayer and in the abiding, staying power of a lifestyle, of a character of being. I mean, you think of contemplative prayer, simply, is those moments, we can't cause it, no matter what I do, but I can dispose myself for it. And I can work at it. Like recollection is the path that I work to dispose myself for contemplation. But in that moment, God lifts me out of myself, so I quit thinking about myself and what I want and what I need and all that. And I enter into this moment of just a kind of mutual sharing of love, experiencing myself as loved by God and loving Him in return. And so it is an ecstatic moment like that. It's kind of moments you might have with your spouse where you're maybe looking at her or him and you just realize after 30 years of marriage how deeply you are still in love with this person. And your sense of knowing the person, not you could prepare a list, like that. You could do some of that, but that sense of knowledge and just knowing the whole person and how beautiful and lovely this person is. And, that's contemplation in a way. So, and that sort of experience, if it's authentic, because people can fake anything, if it's authentic, it's transformative. It sets us, it opens us up and changes us as persons in the way that we relate to other people, relate to communities of persons, we relate to the events of our lives, the society that shapes me and I'm part of, etc. That's where, the whole idea of an integral ecology is in order to have this being, having your place in the world as a kind of integral ecology, as Pope Francis understands it, we need to have a healthy, energized, inspired Holy Spirit. Of course, it's Holy Spirit working within us, but in our spirit. We have all these aspects to ourselves. They ultimately form a whole, of course, but we have our physical well-being, and we have our emotional well-being, just as we have our emotional wounds, physical wounds. I've got my physical wounds here. Our intellectual well-being, our curiosity, or capacity to learn new things, etc. All these aspects to ourselves, well, they all ultimately lead up to a healthy human spirit and the virtues of the spirit. Okay. To return to the quote of Pope Francis, when the desire to create and contemplate beauty manages to overcome reductionism through a kind of salvation which occurs in beauty and in those who behold it. Well, whenever this desire triumphs, what then happens? What comes next? I would say, in a word, spirituality. I think beauty is a very strong component of our growth in the spirit. I mean, John of the Cross is filled with this notion of beauty. There's a famous passage where he says beauty like 23 times in a paragraph or something like that. And so John of the Cross is filled with this. Our spirit awakens to an honest, heartfelt, often heart-wrenching re-examination of our way of being in the world, in our relation to others, to ourselves, to others, to the events unfolding around us, potentially to all creation, and beyond, to the divine, the eternal. I mean, eternity is, God himself is kind of scary. The ultimate unknowable transcendence of the divine is unnerving. And so, of course, we have to humanize it in a way, which is probably not bad. It's, as Catholics, as Christians, it's part of the incarnational aspect of God's self-revelation. But if our human self is wounded, is stunted in some way, then that sense of God is going to be more or less a projection of our needs, or blindnesses, etc. So we have to clear away. We have to nurture the human spirit and clear away so that God can be present to us as God. Okay. As Pope Francis says on 2 other occasions in Laudate Si, quoting his prior exhortation, the joy of the gospel, realities are always greater and more important than ideas. Just as I would add, spirituality is greater and more important than theology, because it is about our lives in the real world, our real lives, and not those lives we imagine in our heads. I mean, when I used to teach spirituality to the seminarians in New Orleans, I would say to them, and we would have a unit or two on this, you're going to get a lot of theology of Eucharist, and I'm not here to teach you that. You're going to get that. But I'm here to teach you what, in my biased way, seems to me more important. And that, how do you become a Eucharistic person? You know, otherwise, you're just dealing with ideas in your head, unless they're real for you. And they become real because they transform us in some way. And so, you know, realities are always greater and more important than ideas. That's what our Pope says. What Hegel said, when reality is green and ideas are gray, or something he said. Ideas are gray and reality is green. No, that was Goethe, I think, said that. Goethe, not Hegel. Something like that. I would say that it's not a huge leap, nor just a play on words, to go from the term spirituality as we in Carmel would commonly understand it, in all its richness to a term that takes us into the heart of the message of Laudate Si. The term I have in mind is, as you may have guessed, ecology. If we understand ecology in this broader sense of the world in which we live, our relation to that which is, my relation to that which is greater than myself. Pope Francis defines ecology thus: ecology studies the relationship between living organisms and the environment in which they develop. So when we talk about human society and the ways it stunts the spirit, we're talking about a spiritual ecology that our society has crafted for good or for ill in our personal development, personal spiritual development, but also, if people aren't getting the health care they need, it's an ecology that doesn't sustain the bodies that we have, or if they're not getting a good education. It's an ecology that doesn't really feed the mind and help sustain the growth of an intellectual life. Moving then specifically into the realm of human life, human ecology might be called a kind of spiritual anthropology. Yes, it's just words. And the environment in which we develop can, of course, be looked at from a variety of perspectives and interests. But spiritually, religiously, it is the environment of grace and of sacrament, of the imminent yet transcendent, the already not yet environment of the Holy Spirit. I mean, these are paradoxes that lie at the heart of our faith, and why, they get poo-pooed by people that find science as the oracle of all truth. That God is already here, but he's not yet. He's present, but he's hidden. He's immanent, he's present, but yet he's transcendent. And so we can't grasp God, he grasps us, and we can live in the presence of God, but we can't hold it. It's like the column of cloud that the Israelites followed through the desert. You can't control it, but he's there for you. I am who I am. I'm here for you, but you can't name me. I love the story about Elijah in the cave on Mount Horeb or Mount Sinai, and he's there, and all these demonstrations of power come, and earthquake and volcano. What is that? Whirlwind. Lightning, yes, lightning, of course. All these demonstrations of power, impressive. But God's not in those. And it's almost like, saying to the pagan world, which tended to associate God with demonstrations of power, both natural power, but also, perhaps most importantly, social and political power. The king is closer to God than I am. And the king, what the king does, he does on behalf of God, etc. So, but all that, God's not in any of that. And then Elijah steps up to the mouth of the cave, and this sound of sheer silence. So we usually hear it translated as a whispering or a small whispering sound or something like that, a gentle breeze or something. But the Hebrew literally says the sound of sheer silence. And that's where God appears. Elijah covers his face with his cloak. So, you know, it's that sense of the mystery, the transcendence, the uncontrollable aspect of God, of that I am who I am. That is also at the heart. Well, obviously, you know, the Holy Spirit is the breath of God breathed into us as grace. Then, of course, our spirit and our very self and our life and our relationships with others and all that come to be in this, having this mysterious beauty and life-giving uncontrollableness. I mean, if I'm in a relationship with another person and my object is to control them, I'm not going to get anything out of it. It's just a projection of myself. They are there just to do whatever, to make me feel good or whatever it is. But if I can let the other person be another person, I mean, that's one of my little sayings is other people are other people. And so let them be, then I can grow in and through the relationship because it's a true relationship, not just a projection of myself. Okay, well, time. Ooh. So let's take a break and come back in, what do you think, 20 minutes? 15 minutes? Okay, so 11:20. Okay. Thank you. See you then. I think Leo set up some snacks, cake.
Yes.
So help yourself to that. There's coffee, there's juice, the water, of course.
It's still recording, right?
I think so.
You can do a dance in front of them.
Yeah, right.
They're going to edit it later.
Yeah. Well, usually asking questions and stuff.
Yeah. She's always.
I need to stay there.
I don't know if we're going to have this sponsor. Oh no, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
It's just that I always remember something else.
What?
I always I try to do something.
There we go. Okay.
Okay, so set. Okay, very good. So let's continue. I'm going to read just a couple quotes from Laudate Si, skipping all my thoughts, very skippable thoughts. An integral ecology, so he's talking about this notion that he's presenting. An integral ecology, you see how I stumble with words. That's one thing that's been in trouble for me ever since the brain surgery. My mouth just doesn't work. It's right the way I used to. You should hear me in Spanish. But the people are so kind. Gracious people. An integral ecology includes taking time to recover a serene harmony with creation, reflecting on our lifestyle and our ideals, and contemplating the Creator who lives among us and surrounds us, whose presence must not be contrived, but found, uncovered. I like that expression. The presence of God is discovered, uncovered, and is found. God is there waiting for us, and we seek Him. We don't contrive Him or think Him up. That's, you know, I was in a discussion with a guy who was, I don't know if he'd call himself an atheist or an agnostic, or that doesn't matter. But we were talking about the reality of God. He was saying, you know, well, I have trouble believing in God because I don't see any evidence of it, which is, you know, what people do. And my response to him was, I don't know if this is important. I'm speaking about myself. But my response to him was, yeah, but He's there. Can you feel Him? Can you sense it? He's right here, right now with us. You know, people can think all kinds of things, make statements about this or that. But once you've experienced the truth of God, however gently it is, you'll find a way to believe if you have whatever. It's like the disciples with the risen Christ. I don't really know for sure what their experience was. I mean, the gospel stories we have were trying to deal with this mysterious event, and also are trying to answer and respond to other questions. You know, so they have a larger agenda to them. But the simple, you know, Paul, for example, his experience, which he never talks about. It would have been nice if he had talked about it, but he doesn't. And it was probably powerful, very powerful, obviously, changed his life, but probably rather simple. Probably not, you know, not with trumpets blaring. Yeah. But it was, you know, it converted them all in the reality of the risen Christ, and how God has acted in and through this death, and this Jesus that they have come to know, acted for the salvation of ultimately the world. Took them a little while to get there, you know. But anyway, Pope goes on. We are speaking of an attitude of heart, one which approaches life with serene attentiveness. That's a lovely expression. Which is capable of being fully present to someone without thinking of what comes next. I like that. Which accepts each moment as a gift from God to be lived to the full. You know, so this is a sense of integral ecology as a whole lifestyle. It's rooted in prayer, but it also overflows in our capacity to listen, for example. I mean, I don't know. It seems to me that it's a common experience that people just don't listen. They don't read in the sense of allowing the text to speak to them. It's just the text becomes what they want to hear. Or how can I use this for whatever? And they don't really listen at all. And so they live in this isolated capsules, their helmet on. I don't know. That's why, you know. Sometimes, you know, I've seen a few of those odious Karen videos of women losing it and freaking out, you know. Someone parks too close to their car and they have a little trouble getting out. And so they just fly off the handle. And of course it gets recorded because the person that they're flying off the handle to gets the phone out. So you can't do any of this in secret anymore. And it's just like, who are these people? What, you know? It's like if you were going to the grocery store and you're going down a particular aisle and you want something at the end of the aisle, there is this old man or old lady or Carmelite limping along with his cart, looking for something, and he's in your way, and you just fly off the handle, start calling him names and everything. You know, what kind of person does this stuff? But unfortunately, there are those, wherever they come from. I mean, that's an extreme example on the other side. Here's another quote from Laudate Si. Although the post-industrial period may well be remembered, post-industrial, so he would be talking 20th century. Industrial revolution was, early 19th century to latter part of it. But the post-industrial period would be a period that I grew up in, where there's obviously industry, but increasingly we have more of an information-based economy, or the massive financialization of the economy. You know, that's what 40% of the economy is people trading money, you know, stocks, bonds, other stuff, in which nothing is really created. It just, you know, people trading money and money that, there's no substance to it. But anyway, you know, that's what he means by post-industrial, I think. Although the post-industrial period may well be remembered as one of the most irresponsible in history, nonetheless, there is reason to hope that humanity at the dawn of the 21st century may well be remembered for having generously shouldered its grave responsibilities. I continue. While I share this first sentiment, we've been pretty irresponsible, I have doubts about the second, at least in this country, probably throughout the world. As the saying goes, where there's death, there's hope. So, you know, one of the causes for hope in the future is that you and I die off. There are other people, all new people. You know, it's true. You know, we're stuck in our ways, and we ain't going to change, and we just need to get out of the way. It is with the millennials, I believe, that one finds hope. Maybe. I don't know. I was writing this a little bit before, but I think, you know, there's a lot of energy among the millennials that is promising. Of course, the Generation Z now is the new thing. Of course, the jury is still out, but that's where we who are associated with a religious institute and with the charismatic bodies, that's where we come in. While we may not be able to do a whole lot ourselves on the big stage, we can still give at least personal witness to the younger generation by seeking to inspire and enlighten them out of a spiritually vital, contemporary, and authentic lifestyle. So you grasp what I'm saying. There is a tendency sometimes in religious orders, in Carmel, is to sort of disparage the young. It's a way of circling the wagons, you know, and not really responding to the questions that the young have and the uncertainties and the millennials are, they've done, this is based on polling and stuff like that. Millennials, there's pretty, in this country, among Catholics, there's a pretty constant belief in God, about 80%. Maybe that's going down a little bit now, but this is what in the past. The problem is that with regard to institutions, and not just the church, but all kinds of institutions, the police, Congress, academia, the courts, all these things. There's a sort of cynical distrust of institutions. And when millennials or the young people look at religious life or the priesthood or something, what they see is pedophiles who have been covered up or something, which is very, 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 very far from the truth. But that's what they've been inculcated with. Or they see phonies who, like a priest that gets all consumed about some little thing in the liturgy. And an altar server doesn't do something just right, and the priest chews him out in the sacristy or something. And they see this sort of phony thing. So he gives a wonderful homily on love of neighbor, and then he chews up the altar server in the sacristy because he didn't hold the book right or something. This kind of stuff turns young people off, to put it mildly. I have a nephew, very bright fellow, but he got turned off. I'm not sure what happened, but probably also just a willingness himself to see things in a certain way and therefore make an excuse for him to walk a different path. But one time he said to me, the problem with Catholicism, it's all a bunch of rules and regulations, which is basically a way of saying it's all phony. You're just following these rules and regulations, but there's no substance to it. So I just looked at him and said, Alan is his name. Alan, you know that's not true. I wasn't going to play that game with him. You know that's not true. So if you want to talk about religion, let's talk about religion. Anyway, Laudate Si itself offers a simple example of how Carmelite spirituality might be reinterpreted in terms of our present ecological crisis. Pope Francis sums up nicely the little way of St. Therese in these words. St. Therese of Lisieux invites us to practice the little way of love, not to miss out on a kind word, a smile, or any small gesture which sows peace and friendship. An integral ecology is also made up of simple gestures which break with the logic of violence, exploitation, and selfishness. You get what he's saying here. In the parable, or it's not a parable, but in that Jesus does tell a parable, but St. Peter says, if my brother sins against me, how many times must I forgive him? And 7 times, he offers 7 times. And Jesus says, no, not 7 times, but 77 times. And where does the 77 come from? Well, it's a reference, and Peter would have picked up on this. It's a reference to an obscure passage in the Old Testament that follows the story of Cain and Abel, where some guy called Lamech, some noble warrior or something, says, Cain will be, if someone, sins against Cain, Cain will be avenged 7 times, but Lamech will be avenged 77 times. It's a kind of a boast that he gives. And so that, they're writing the history and the logic of violence, of revenge, etc. Going back to Cain, the logic of violence. And Jesus says, no, let's have another logic, a logic of forgiveness, a history of forgiveness. Rewrite human history. And just little acts of forgiveness. I'm of the belief that it's almost impossible to forgive someone unless they ask for forgiveness. And if you look at the stories that Jesus tells, that's what he's talking about. When someone comes and says, I've sinned against you, will you forgive me? Or I can't pay my debt. And then the person says yes or no. I've heard people tell me in my life to my face, I can't forgive you. I've said, I'm very sorry what I did. Would you forgive me? They would, no. And so I think fundamentally the forgiveness is about this kind of dynamic. I suppose it's possible to forget the hurt even though the other person doesn't acknowledge it. Forgiveness is fundamentally built on truth, and that's, we have to have truth between us before we can reconcile. So we live with a lot of hurts and loose ends and all that stuff, and that's why as Catholics we believe in purgatory. That's where we have to make the rounds, and like being in AA, you have to go around to everybody. And so, but there is a logic, a history there that we can be part of and try. Just as St. Therese sought to believe firmly that these hidden out-of-the-way acts of love can have universal import, helping to keep alive that love that is the pulse beating at the heart of the church. You understand what I'm alluding to. I didn't make it clear. Therese has that famous passage where she's trying to find her vocation. What is my vocation? What's my vocation? I'm not a missionary, I'm not a teacher, blah, blah, blah. And finally she discovers that my vocation is to be love at the heart of the church. And so her little way, these little acts, as obscure and hidden as they may be, she believes that she's accomplishing at the heart of the church, and therefore in God they have a potentially worldwide import, and meaning. Anyway, so these little acts that we can do, well, they don't seem to accomplish a whole lot. And it is our faith that God takes them and then uses it for the good beyond our grasp. you probably all have all had some experience of that. You've been praying for someone. You don't really hear your prayer answered, and then 10 years later, you happen to meet the person. And they say, you know, this happened to me, it is such a blessing, blah, blah, my life changed, etc. And you say, you know, how wonderful, I didn't know that, you know. And you see how your prayer was answered beyond your wildest dreams. Pope Francis writes, personal acts of trying to live simply and sustainably benefit society, often unbeknown to us, for they call forth a goodness which, albeit unseen, inevitably tends to spread. Furthermore, such actions can restore our sense of self-esteem. They can enable us to live more fully and to feel that life on earth is worthwhile. Very, very powerful reflections. Just simple, to try and live simply in a sustainable way, as you know, as if I'm really helping Ukrainian people by wearing this. It reminds me to pray for them, and who knows? Yeah. These kind of things, I think, you know, every city has a little, its own culture of driving. And I think it's a kind of collection of, well, if you're driving in a city, you have to kind of meld with the culture. So if it's a real aggressive culture with people are driving and tailgating and all that stuff, you have to fit within this. And so you modify your driving in order to, and the next thing you know, everybody drives this way. You know, I think Dallas is the city with the driving culture that, I don't know what word to use. Not pleasant. Yeah. And you know, I get in confession all the time, mostly for men, but also for women. You know, I got really upset on the road, and you know, I'll say, "Why did you give him a middle finger?" No. Maybe a bad word escaped my mouth or something. You know, this is, well, try and practice patience and calm down and don't let other people's driving affect you, and that therefore you can say, you know, there's enough aggression on the road, I don't have to add to it. You know, that's just a simple example of how we're part of a whole culture, and the culture shapes us whether or not we like it, and by our participation we kind of further it for good or bad. But if we can make simple personal changes in our lives, we can have an impact too. You know, like deciding not to be aggressive in driving, you know, or in Texas deciding to drive a sedan rather than a pickup. I don't know, this, I guess it's part of the culture too, these big trucks with the big wheels and everything. Oh, I'm revealing myself. Okay. No, about 15 minutes, so maybe if I can just stick to the text, maybe I can get through this. Turning to the poetry of St. John of the Cross, Pope Francis makes it easy for me to connect Carmelite spirituality to Laudate Si. He references those famous stanzas from the spiritual canticle, the poem, not the prose work. The famous stanzas from the spiritual canticle, where the bride celebrates the bridegroom upon their first finding each other. If you remember the poem, it starts out there, the bride, the bridegroom has fled. And so the bride, after, sending out some messengers and stuff, but she does what no woman should do. She goes out in search of him. And there is an encounter. It's fascinating how he does this. She's sitting at a well or a fountain, kind of exhausted from her searching. This has come up fruitless. She's sitting out this fountain. She looks in it and sees her reflection. But then in the eyes of herself, her reflection in this fountain, she sees the beloved, the bridegroom. It's a very interesting way John of the Cross does this. And then at that moment, then of course he's gone. He just reveals himself briefly, and then he flees and says, "Come fly with me," as a popular song. "Come fly with me, my dove, let's follow after me," etc. And though then she celebrates her beloved with this hymn about natural beauty in the stall, these famous lines. So let me read them. It's just 3 stanzas from the bigger poem. "O my beloved, the mountains and hidden wooded valleys, fabled islands and roaring rivers, the whistling of love-laden breezes, the night's utter stillness at the first streaks of dawn, hushed music, far echoing emptiness, the supper that refreshes and delights. Our bed as gentle as flowers, enlacing lions' dens, draped in purple and set upon peace, canopied with countless gold shields." It's almost like Song of Songs type of imagery that borders on the surreal in ways. Of course, the tendency we have when reading something like that is, well, it must be allegorical and every image means something other than itself, as opposed to letting the poem speak for itself and letting the imagery symbolically express itself to us without having to think it out. Like when, "Oh my beloved, the mountains and hidden wooded valleys." When you ask, what does that mean? It means I mean what I just said. That's what usually poets will say that, if you ask, "Well, what did this poem mean?" They'll either go, "Oh, what did it mean to you?" Or "It means what it said." So the mountains and hidden wooded valleys, fabled islands, that sense of something, in John of the Cross's world, these were things bordering on the edge of the world. Of course, John of the Cross knew that the world was round. I was watching a video the other day. It's a scientific thing. It was a science talk. And he says, and he had this map and this little boat, kind of Columbus, and he says, when they discovered that the world was round, Columbus didn't discover the world was round. The ancient Greeks knew the world was round. Dante knew the world was round. mean, the Middle Ages knew the world was round. You know, this as a scientist, and he says something laughable like that. I guess it's not his field, though. So, anyway, all the imagery, you know, with the whistling of love-laden breezes, you know, that conjures a lot in our experience of a warm summer night with a breeze, maybe a kind of humidity to it, you know, so it's like balmy and stuff. Anyway, so the Pope quotes those lines in this encyclical. Pope Francis alludes to this passage when he imagines the poet as mystic standing enraptured before a mountain. And he says, standing awestruck before a mountain, the mystic cannot separate his experience from God and perceives that the interior awe being lived has to be entrusted to the Lord. So, you know, experience of natural, like myself in the pine cone, this is a moment of awe, of wonder, of beauty. And I can't, you know, separate. I mean, a botanist can tell me nothing about that experience. He might be able to tell me all kinds of things about pine cones, but that's irrelevant. You know, I'm not having a botanical experience. And so, you know, and so in that moment of relationship and communion, then I have this sense of awe, of wonder, of mystery. And what do I do with it? For persons like ourselves, it's part of the living presence of God in the world. And so, of course, I experience the presence of God in that pine cone, like the burning bush or something like that. I mean, the pine cone is not God, as I said, but God comes forth and is present to me through the mystery and wonder and beauty of this pine cone. And obviously, you know, if I have experiences in life of that sort, then my life becomes a life of cherishing, of taking care of. You know, it's like all of us have this experience when it comes to children. You know, I was present. I had the good fortune of being present when my nephew, my sister's boy, was born. Luckily, it was a fast and smooth birth, so I didn't have to. I didn't have to witness screaming and all that stuff like they have on TV. You know, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure births are of that sort at times, but I think they overdo it a bit on TV or in movies or something. But anyway, the child comes out, and of course they wrap him in swaddling clothes and all that, and so they put him under the lamp with something like a French fries or something, and then you know, there's this creature is that, you know, this tiny, completely helpless creature who is so precious, and you have that response of, you know, of love, of desire to care and to nurture, and the idea of doing any harm to this is unthinkable. And everybody has that experience if we can only just see that experience in response to other people, especially those who are very different than ourselves, or pine cones, or nature in general, human society.
Father, I was thinking about the young child, so that same maybe a year or 2 or 3 older, who, you know, if we allow the child, if we're taking the child for a walk, they stop frequently to look at a little ant, a bug over here, to look at everything. And it's because there's this sense of awe and wonder that's in the child that some of us lose.
You're right.
But it's natural to the
Yeah,
child.
they're fascinated by the world, and they're completely open. They're learning every day. They're learning thousands of things. You know, just like language acquisition. It's amazing. You know, just by listening to me stumbling through words or whatever, they can absorb this language in a relatively short period of time. Yeah, it's amazing. You're right, very right. I was in the airport waiting for one of the friars to return. And it was at the international gate, and there was a Korean airline flight coming, and so there was a bunch of Koreans there. Fascinating people. I mean, I shouldn't speak like that about them, but Koreans are very interesting, and their movies and everything, TV shows are very popular, justly so. That's amazing. But anyway, they were there, and of course they had their little kids with them, and so the kids are just running around checking out everything, you know. And just, of course, they have this, you know, just run up to someone, look at, you know, who are you, this sort of thing, you know. Yeah. One was kind of funny. There was this one went running over this area. Of course, mom's chasing him, but he's running over the area. And another one was here, saw the child running, and so went running toward it. Yeah, very, very true. Oh, I got this note. The mystic cannot separate this experience from God, perceives that the interior awe being lived has to be entrusted to the Lord. That simple statement is, for me, one of the finest, most succinct statements of what a true nature mysticism is all about. It's not that we divinize nature in some strange way, nor that we somehow perceive the divine as radiating out of, but distinct from the natural world, like a ghost in a dead body. Rather, experiencing the beauty and sublimity, grandeur, and mystery of nature as present in itself, we then spontaneously entrust our interior response to God in His transcendence. You follow that? I don't need to explain. Probably it's usually poetry that is best at capturing this thing, or a kind of poetic prose, because of the way it's able to reach down deep in us and pull forth the wonder and mystery of things, and their particularity too. You know, not all pine cones are one pine cone. Each pine cone is unique. Speaking about YouTube videos, I saw this YouTube video, and it used probabilities of, you know, the DNA from one parent and another, and how this could arrive at that particular person. And then, of course, you add to that all life experiences. It wasn't reductionistic, as sometimes science is, that we're just packets of DNA. But, you know, just the unique blend of DNA that each of us has. And he calculated probabilities, and it's, the probability of my being who I am should I say? I don't know if it's greater or smaller than every molecule. No, yeah, every atom on the Earth. Like, if I were to take an atom from all the Earth and put it in another place, and the person could find it, they would have a greater probability of finding that atom than I being born with the DNA that I have. So the guy concludes, all of us are absolutely unique, one in a universe events. There's been nothing in the whole universe, that duplicates any of us. We're all absolutely, like snowflakes, we're absolutely unique. And so it's that sense of that science can say nothing about it except the probability issues. But that sense of the wonder of another person, the wonder of, when I was early teens, you would lie awake at night, be grasped by the utter uniqueness of this life, this experience that I've been kind of thrown in. I didn't choose it. I just kind of said, here, this is who you are. And it's overwhelming and kind of scary, especially when you're a young teenager. It's pretty scary. You try and find your way in the world in time. But it's an incredible responsibility, not just that I have, but that the human family has, to nurture and care for each unique person as best we can. Now, I can't do that, but I can do something. I can be part of a Carmelite community and do something to care for everybody. Anyway, I will quit now because I've run out of time and because you've had enough. But I want to finish with a poem by Jessica Powers, also known as Miriam of the Holy Spirit. She was a Carmelite nun, an American. She lived her life in the first it was the Milwaukee Carmel, and then they moved the Carmel out of the city into a town, more or less a suburb, but there's a little distance there, called Pewaukee. So she was a member of the Pewaukee Carmel. And her name, what should I say, her legal name or whatever, Jessica Powers. And then when in religion she took on the name of Miriam of the Holy Spirit. She got caught up in the Catholic Renaissance, the Catholic literary Renaissance of the early 20th century. When people like Flannery O'Connor were writing, or T.S. Eliot for that matter, etc. And you had this movement of mostly, not exclusively, but mostly Catholic authors who were trying to use modern literature, not antiquated literature, but modern literature to express their faith. Graham Greene would be another example of someone like this. And so she was part of that even before she entered Carmel. She was writing poetry and stuff. So she entered Carmel, and thanks be to God, the Carmel let her continue writing poetry. I know some Carmels personally that probably would not have let her continue. But luckily that she could continue writing. We have her poetry from most of what we have. And you can kind of see through the years as she spiritually grew. And when you look at this, so this is a poem from 1984, which about 4 years before she died, 1988, or is it 1989? But, you know, toward the end of her life, more or less. It's called To Live with the Spirit. I think it expresses pretty well the thoughts I've tried to get at here. Well, let me read first these 2 quotes from Laudate Si. The needed spiritual conversion underlying an integral ecology entails a loving awareness that we are not disconnected from the rest of creatures, but joined in a splendid universal communion. As believers, we do not look at the world from without, but from within, conscious of the bonds with which the Father has linked us to all beings. Excuse me. And another quote. Fraternal love can only be gratuitous. It can never be a means of repaying others for what they have done or will do to us, for us. That is why it is possible to love our enemies. This same gratuitousness inspires us to love and accept the wind, the sun, and the clouds, even though we cannot control them. In this sense, we can speak of a universal fraternity. Those are striking quotes. I don't know how you react to it. Yeah. He's taking the basic Catholic vision and expanding it to embrace the whole of creation, or creation as we know it here on this planet Earth. But anyway, here's the poem by Jessica Powers, and then I'll let you go as if I have any control of it. If you want to leave, it's called To Live with the Spirit. To live with the Spirit. To live with the Spirit of God is to be a listener. It is to keep the vigil of memory, earthless and still. One leans to catch the stirring of the Spirit, strange as the winds will. The soul that walks where the wind of the Spirit blows turns like a wandering weather vane toward love. It may lament like Job or Jeremiah, echo the wounded heart. Heart is a deer, not heart. But echo the wounded heart, as in John the Cross, the beloved. Echo the wounded heart, the mateless dove. It may rejoice in spaciousness of meadow that emulates the freedom of the sky. Always it walks in waylessness, unknowing. It has cast down forever from its hand the compass of the whither and the why. To live with the Spirit of God is to be a lover. It is becoming love and like to him toward whom we strain the metaphors of creatures. Fires sweep and water rush and the winds win. Let me read that again. I didn't read it very well. To live with the Spirit of God is to be a lover. It is becoming love and like to him, toward whom we strain with metaphors of creatures. What she's saying is, to live with the Spirit is to become like God, like to him. And who is him? The one we strain towards through metaphors of creatures. We talk about God as sun, wind, whatever. And so we strain through metaphors of creatures. And in doing that, we are transformed into becoming like him. And then she, to whom we strain with metaphors of creatures, fire sweep and water rush, and the winds win. Probably she's thinking the hymn is the Holy Spirit, though, here. Because her image is fire sweep. She uses the verb, not fire swept, but she used the active verb, fire sweep. And water rush, and the winds win. Those are images of the Holy Spirit. The soul is all activity, all silence. And though it surges Godward to its goal, it holds as moving earth holds sleeping noonday, the peace that is the listening of the soul. Okay, I shouldn't talk her over her incredible poem. Anyway, there you go. Thank you for your attentiveness. And I love to talk, as obviously I do. So I like good listeners. No, I appreciate your being here and giving me this opportunity to share with you about something that's very important. We're not movers and shakers, but we have some say in the life that we live, and the purpose that we have in life, and that which are those to whom we belong. In a certain sense, when we're young, we're always asking, who am I, and how do I find my identity, and all that stuff. And then we go through this, as we become adults, we go through this switch, and we realize that's not the question to be asking. The question is, to whom I belong to. Do I belong to? For what do I belong? And finding my identity and purpose in love, in relationship, etc. I guess that's a fine note to end on. So, oh. So I guess this will show up on the website, Mount Carmel's website. If for some twisted reason you want to watch it again.
I probably would.
Oh God, you poor thing.
Yeah, well, because I do 10 minutes at a time.
Yeah.
Like that's what I do usually, like 5 to 10 minutes, and then
Yeah.
I just do it.
Okay. And I think it's also on YouTube. We have a YouTube page being posted on YouTube next to the Karen videos. Oh, God. So God bless you all. Yeah.
I think I really like what you said about character being and how that comes out in one's spirituality. It comes out of contemplation, and whether it's contemplation in any form we want to say, the time to come, whatever.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it is a dynamic. If that is in fact what then informs and changes, transforms, at least for the moment.
The what?
At least,
I'm having trouble with this
I
guy.
know, at least for the moment.
Uh-huh.
At least for the moment, we're released, and our interior being is set free and changed. And I think phrase the character of being out of contemplation. It's really great.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, certain virtues like patience, understanding, willingness rather than willfulness, all these virtues, prayer inculcates, that's my new word for the day, these kind of virtues in us. And, in very subtle ways, that's why John of the Cross says that we have to go through the dark nights and stuff to be really changed. because we have to learn to let go and let God do it. And let God work with us in the depths of our hearts so that we can be truly transformed. Otherwise, ultimately, we're kind of playing a game with ourselves.
And just a thought about forgiveness. You talked about forgiveness being something that must be requested. I think that's how you phrase that, and that's what appears in the Gospels, and I've not thought about that. But I guess in recent days, I thought, I don't know that, it seems that forgiveness, it seems that if we place it simply in the nature of God, that forgiveness is part of the love and nature of God, that that's also to be our, where we want to be one day. And my thing is, and I had a friend of mine who was talking about parenting, and I can't get it exact. It was beautiful. It was like, because his daughter had not remembered his wife's birthday, and she's off at college. She's at Smith College up on the East Coast, and life couldn't be better. Okay. And he said something to that. He said, parenthood is filled with nothing but forgiveness. And I just thought to myself, yes, that's really, and that's forgiveness that's not requested. That's forgiveness which is an abiding presence of a parent.
I understand. I would hesitate to use the word forgiveness. It's letting go. It's accepting other people are other people, and they're going to do these things, and I have no control of them, and I have no desire. And so deciding not to punish, forgiveness is ultimately acting in order to restore the relationship that has been potentially broken. But we do those kinds of things all the time. It's not worth making a big deal out of this and looking beyond it because we want the relationship to remain intact, I suppose. So I just hesitate the word. Again, this is semantics. And Jesus calls us to love our enemies, as Pope Francis quoted. And so if someone does something really bad to me, and never asks for forgiveness and stuff, I'm going to have a really struggle with that. But Jesus says, love my enemies, and so I'll treat him as an enemy. Which means I love them. I love the person despite myself. But again, this is semantics, and forgiveness probably should, as you say, be used in the broadest sense. Although I also find something of value in using it as in as precise a sense as it can to describe this particular thing. Another reason I have this is when I talked about confession with people. Why should I go to confession? Can God forgive me without my going to confession? As if it was some sort of magic thing that forced God to forgive me or something. All these kind of attitudes that sometimes people have. But I'll say, isn't it better? Don't you feel more healed if the person comes to you and asks for forgiveness, or you go to them and ask for forgiveness? Well, that's what we're doing in confession. We acknowledge what we've done. We live in the truth. And then we go to confession, acknowledging it, and the person of the priest representing the church that represents God gives forgiveness. Yeah. So that's another intention I have in this, because in catechism and stuff, these kind of questions always come up. Yeah. And people tend to think magically about this sort of thing. Yeah. Very well. Did he turn this off?
He has not.
Oh, do you know what to do?
No.
Just put a copy
Finally read.
I assume we just push the on.
Yeah,
Probably what you do.
that would make sense.